If we wanted to fly along a certain route using GPS or some other system of nav aids, but we're only accurate 50% of the time, it wouldn't be very useful. So we need to keep up certain standards in our equipment whilst we are flying. And that's all PBN is really. It's quite simple. Hi, I'm Grant and welcome to the 14th and final class in the radio navigation series before we do another study session. Today we're going to be having a look at PBN, which is a pretty simple concept to understand, and we'll also have a look at some flight management system basics to help you understand the real world applications of PBN and how it all works. In the early days of radio navigation, pilots had to fly from nav aid to nav aid along defined airways. This was okay, but there was a limit to the number of planes that could fly along each route to keep things safely separated from one another. Around the 1970s, flight management systems and flight management computers were starting to come into service in a lot of large aircraft, allowing pilots to create and define waypoints using these nav aids based off of a bearing and distance, or by using GPS and latitude and longitude coordinates. This allowed for aviation charts and new airways to be published using this new method of waypoint creation, where it wasn't a physical point on Earth, but a virtually created waypoint within the flight management computer and within the charts that everybody knew where it was and could fly along safely. This type of navigation was called area navigation, which is shortened to RNAV. Some aircraft had RNAV capability and some did not. The ones that did were allowed and able to fly along new airways and fly more efficient and direct routes. For example, if we had an airport down off on the bottom right corner, we have to fly up, join this airway, come all the way across to get to an airport at the end here. Whereas if we had RNAV capability, we could take off, fly straight here, cut the corner, and save a bit of time. So the aircraft that didn't have the capability to fly RNAV routes were kind of stuck on the old routes and had to fly the longer, less efficient routes, burning more fuel, costing more money. So it didn't take very long for area navigation to catch on and become quite a common thing for aircraft to have. Soon after, certain standards of accuracy were defined, originally known as basic RNAV and precision RNAV. These are now both non-existent, and we now define accuracy standards in terms of how accurate the aircraft needs to be at least 95% of the time. For example, a STAR, a standard terminal arrival chart created using RNAV principles, might require RNAV2 capability, meaning that we have to have a plane capable of flying to within 2 nautical miles of accuracy 95% of the time. You can also get RNAV 10, 5, 2 and 1 depending on the type of chart and route that you are flying. The equipment used for this form of navigation and to fly along RNAV routes has to tell you it is failed. But if the accuracy of it degrades rather than the equipment fully failing, there is no requirement to tell you of this degraded accuracy. This means that you could fly along a route with your equipment slowly degrading in performance until the time that it fails. At that point, the equipment failed, you can no longer fly along the SID or STAR, but you might have already drifted off by 2, 3, 4 nautical miles. So this was a bit confusing and not very good. So the industry decided that we should probably start the self-monitoring of the equipment's accuracy, not just if it has failed. And by self-monitoring, I mean that the equipment is monitoring itself, and it might display to the pilots, oh, you're starting to drift off course. You might want to fly across a different route or try a traditional airway instead, where you don't have to rely on this RNAV principle. This self-monitoring process defined a new set of standards which is called RNP, which stands for Required Navigation Performance. The active self-monitoring of the accuracy of the equipment is the key difference between just an RNAV specification and an RNP specification. By self-monitoring, again, it's that equipment monitoring itself, and it can alert pilots to any degrading accuracy. RNP follows the same principle in terms of level of accuracy. We have to be accurate 95% of the time to within whatever number follows the RNP designation. So RNP1 is the same as RNAV1 in terms of accuracy, 1 nautical mile accuracy 95% of the time, but RMP must monitor and alert the pilots of the drifting accuracy if it becomes too much. Another feature of RMP is that we can get far more narrow tolerances due to this active monitoring of the accuracy. An RMP-based procedure, we can get ones that are designed for use in the final approach segments to airfield, where we obviously have to be very accurate because we're quite close to the ground. This type of RMP is called RMP approach. And in RMP approach, basically imagine it as normal RMP where you put a number and that's however nautical miles it is, but the approach stands for 0.3. So you've got to be within 0.3 nautical miles of accuracy if you want to fly an RMP approach procedure. And you can also get something even more accurate than that, which is called RMP approach AR, or rather RMP AR approach, same thing. And the AR stands for approval required, where the tolerance can go from 0.3 for standard approach to 0.1. And it requires special procedures and approval of the airline by the authorities, which is why it's called RMP AR approach, approval required. And you basically follow and have to be within whatever accuracy the chart says for that bit. So you might be coming in with an RMP of 0.1, like a procedure that requires an RMP of 0.1. If your actual navigation performance is less than 0.1 in terms of its inaccuracy, then you're good to fly it. But if your actual navigation performance goes up to 0.2, you can no longer fly the RMP AR approach. It's way more accurate. So as soon as your actual performance is drifting outside of the tolerances, you can't do the approach anymore. You've got to either switch back to something with a lesser tolerance or do a different type of approach. So we now know what the difference is between RNAV and RMP, but how do we use this system? Well, we need to have some infrastructure to use, which is the VORs and the GPS that we get the coordinates from to create all these waypoints and the routes between them. All the routes and waypoints are planned to be well clear of obstacles if the accuracy requirements are maintained. And this will dictate what the required accuracy is for that section of the airway or procedure. This is what we call the specification requirements. So we know that there's mountains 5 nautical miles. This route, we'd probably have to have an accuracy which is lesser than 5 nautical miles to make sure we are clear of the mountains. So it'd either be an RNAV 5 or an RNP 5 procedure. We need to be accurate so that we don't hit any of the mountains. So after we've got the specification, we need to apply the correct procedures and have the correct equipment to fly this sort of thing. For example, we need a database of all these waypoints on our charts that is accurate and the correct equipment to fly it. If we were in a small aircraft flying visually based off of ground-based features and without any charts, then we don't have the correct equipment, aka the charts, and we aren't applying the correct procedures. We're flying visually. We're not going to be able to pick out where these waypoints are. If we can program in GPS latitude and longitude coordinates to create a route based off of accurate charts, then we're going in the right direction to get ready to fly a PBN route. I won't dive into the exact procedures for how to fly PBN or RNAV routes because every company will have probably quite a difference on what they specifically want you to do, but most likely it'll follow along that you've got to program the route into your flight management computer, compare it with charts, and keep an eye on your actual navigation performance versus the required navigation performance for that specific route. A large function of flight management computers on modern aircraft is to have a route in the aircraft's memory so that these area navigation-based waypoints are flown to and between accurately. That is why there's keyboards on some of the newer planes. It's so that the pilots can type in the names of these waypoints to create a plan for the aircraft to fly and for the pilots to fly along and monitor the progress of the route. In summary then, apologies for this layout. I did make another summary and attached to a video, but a couple of eagle-eye viewers noticed a bit of a mistake in it, so I thought I'll try and do this sort of correction. and re-upload the video with this new correction. So in summary, PBN is a set of accuracy standards that we need to follow in order to fly area navigation routes, area navigation being shortened to RNAV. These standards can be applied and applicable to these routes due to a number of things. Sort of terrain can be a big one to think of, or just the actual capability of the aircraft and these special types of routes. We have two standards for RNAV and PBN navigation. We've got RNAV standards, which is 95% accuracy to within X nautical miles, and X obviously being a number that follows the RNAV designator. RNAV has to have failure warnings, but it doesn't have to tell you if it's started to drift, only if the equipment actually breaks. Then you've got RNP, which is the same tolerance in terms of accuracy with RNAV, and we've got the same notification of any failures, but the equipment has to self-monitor itself and tell us if it is starting to drift off course. If the actual navigation performance that the aircraft is doing gets greater than the required navigation performance for that route, then we can no longer fly that specific part of the route. I might have to go back to something traditional. RMP, because of this self-monitoring, can be a lot more accurate, and we can get the window of error, the margin of error, down to quite small amounts. We've got RMP approach, which just imagine the X is replaced by a 0.3. And then we've got RMP AR approach, which basically stands for approval required or authorization required, I can't remember. And these allow it to be reduced below that 0.3 for regular approaches, all the way down to 0.1, and you basically follow whatever is written on the chart. That's the accuracy standard that needs to be maintained for that. And on top of all that, the last thing we looked at was basically how the world of PBN all works. You've got the infrastructure, you need the GPS, you need the nav aids to create these waypoints and these area navigation routes. You need the specification requirements, that is the RNAV rating or the RMP rating of that route, which is decided by the authorities. And then you also need the correct equipment and procedures to follow. If you don't have the correct equipment, if you don't have a GPS receiver, you can't fly one of these routes.